Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into the fascinating world of your brain, guided by Lisa Feldman Barrett's 7.5 Lessons About the Brain.
That's right.
Our listener, the learner, wants to grasp some truly complex ideas quickly and thoroughly, hoping for those, aha moments that stick, all without getting lost in the neurological weeds.
Exactly. And we've got a collection of excerpts from Barrett's book. Think of it as a set of concise, informal essays, each packed with scientific nuggets about the brain and, how they shape what it means to be human. The author, she's a neuroscientist, and she isn't trying to give us a complete textbook, but it's more like an intriguing exploration of some fundamental truths about our brains.
And that's precisely our mission today. We're going to unpack some of the most surprising and, well, thought-provoking lessons from these excerpts.
Yeah, things that might really shift your perspective.
We'll be focusing on concepts that really challenge how we typically think about our brains and, consequently, about ourselves. Okay, let's unpack this. The first big idea that jumps out is your brain isn't primarily for thinking.
Right. That might sound counterintuitive given, our everyday experience. Thinking feels like the main thing.
Totally.
But if we take an evolutionary step back, it starts to make sense. Consider the amphioxus.
Ah, yes, the little sill creature.
A simple creature without a brain that survived, highlighting that early life didn't necessarily require complex thought. It's almost like a stomach on a stick, basically.
Ah, yeah. Not much going on upstairs.
And it doesn't have a brain as we know it, yet it survived. Still around today, actually.
Right. It just sort of existed, swaying in the prehistoric currents, eating whatever grifted its way. Didn't need to ponder existential questions or solve complex equations.
No, its sensory cells were directly linked to its movement cells. Simple input, simple output.
So what changed? What pushed the evolutionary needle towards the complex brains we have today?
Well, the key seems to be the emergence of hunting. Around 500 million years ago, some creatures developed the ability to sense other creatures and actively pursue them for food.
Ah, okay, predation.
Exactly. This shift brought a new critical question into the evolutionary arena. Is that blob in the distance food, or is it going to eat me?
Right. Suddenly, sensing the environment became much more crucial and moving with purpose.
And with that came the need for more sophisticated movement. The amphioxus just sort of wriggled randomly. But these new hunters and the hunted needed to dart, turn, navigate with purpose.
And as bodies became more complex too, right? With internal systems like cardiovascular, respiratory, managing all that must have gotten complicated.
Precisely. These intricate internal systems needed a command center to regulate things like water, salt, oxygen, glucose, hormones, the whole internal milieu. Your body budget, as Barrett calls it.
Body budget, okay.
This is where the brain, as I understand it, really started to become essential. Now, this evolutionary story often gets simplified into what's called the triune brain theory.
Oh yeah, I've heard this. The lizard brain, the emotional limbic system, and then the rational neocortex on top.
That's the one. The whole reptilian brain took over narrative. It's pretty popular.
It is. Makes intuitive sense, kind of.
It does. And it's also an oversimplification and, well, scientifically speaking, inaccurate.
Really? How so?
The human brain didn't just tack on new layers, like adding floors to a building. We didn't inherit a distinct reptilian core that's separate.
So it's not like an old brain plus a middle brain plus a new brain.
No, our brains evolved more like a continuous remodeling project. Think of it that way. Human brains don't have truly new parts in the sense of being completely novel structures. The kinds of neurons we have, you can find them in other mammals and likely other vertebrates too.
Okay, so if we're not just tacking on these new layers, what does that tell us about how our seemingly advanced cognitive abilities actually arose? Because this idea that our rationality, supposedly in the big neocortex, is constantly battling our primal instincts and emotions, that's huge in popular culture.
That's the core of the triune brain myth and its appeal. It fits neatly with, Western cultural beliefs about the superiority of reason over emotion, this sort of platonic struggle within ourselves.
Reason versus passion.
And the large human cerebral cortex is often cited as evidence of our uniquely rational nature. But proportionally speaking, it's not as unusually large as we might think relative to our overall brain size.
Huh. It's like having a big kitchen in a big house, it's expected, maybe. A huge kitchen in a tiny house, that's more noteworthy.
Exactly. A shrew's brain, proportionally, is much bigger relative to its body size than ours. And this whole idea of a constant war between reason and emotion. Barrett argues that they don't even live in separate parts of the brain.
Whoa, okay, so if our brain isn't primarily for thinking in this detached, rational way, what is its main job then? Back to the body budget.
Back to the body budget. That's Barrett's core concept. It's essentially the brain's fundamental task of managing all our bodily resources. Think of it like your body's internal bank account for things like water, salt, glucose, energy. Allostasis is the technical term.
Keeping everything in balance, or rather, predicting needs and meeting them.
Exactly. Predicting and preparing. And rationality, in this context, isn't the absence of emotion. Instead, it's about making good body budgeting investments for survival and thriving in our environment.
Okay, so give me an example.
Well, a rush of cortisol in a dangerous situation. The old triune brain theory might label that as an instinctual, irrational, emotional response hijacking reason.
Yeah, fight or flight.
But from a body budgeting perspective, it's actually rational. Your brain is spending resources, mobilizing energy to prepare you to survive that threat.
It's like a strategic withdrawal from your energy bank account when you really need it.
Uh,
Okay. What about something like PTSD, where the brain keeps triggering a threat response even in a safe environment? That seems irrational.
Even that, Barrett suggests, can be seen as rational body budgeting in a perceived threatful environment. The brain believes it's protecting you by staying vigilant, even if those frequent, costly resource withdrawals are ultimately detrimental in the long run.
So the rationality is relative to the brain's prediction of the situation, even if that prediction is stuck.
Precisely. What we might call mental illnesses could be, at their root, rational body budgeting strategies in the short term that have become mismatched or stuck out of sync with the current actual environment.
This really challenges things like the legal defense of heat of passion. Feeling distressed isn't necessarily irrational. It could be the whole brain, expending resources towards a perceived payoff, even if it doesn't look rational on the surface.
Exactly. The lines get very blurry. And it's crucial then to be aware of the metaphors we use to describe the brain.
Ah, right. You hear them all the time.
Things like the left brain, right brain, system one, system two thinking, mental organs, the brain lighting up on scans or storing memories like files.
Yeah, those are everywhere.
They can be helpful for initial understanding, sure, but they can be really misleading if we take them as literal descriptions of how the brain actually works. They're just analogies.
Okay, so if the idea of distinct, warring brain parts is a myth and metaphors can lead us astray, what's a more accurate picture? Barrett emphasizes that we actually have one highly interconnected brain, not three. Let's dive into that.
Absolutely. It's all about the network. Think of it as maybe 128 billion neurons. The number is debated, but it's huge. Each neuron is like a little tree.
With branches and a trunk.
Kind of. The branches, called dendrites, receive signals from other neurons, and the trunk, the axon, sends signals out. They're constantly communicating with each other through this incredibly intricate wiring.
A massive network. But you said earlier, it's not like every neuron connects to every other one, right? That would be impossible.
Exactly. That would require a brain the size of a building and an impossible amount of energy. The wiring is a balancing act, speed versus cost.
So how does it manage?
Instead of connecting everything to everything, the brain has evolved a structure with lots of short connections locally, some longer connections, and crucial hubs, highly connected neurons that link different areas. It's both powerful and energy efficient.
Like major airports in an airline network.
That's a great analogy, yeah. And this network isn't static, it's constantly changing.
How so?
Well, there are rapid changes through chemical messengers, neurotransmitters, and neuromodulators. Think of neurotransmitters like specific instructions passed between two neurons, maybe like airport staff managing specific gates.
Okay.
And neuromodulators are broader. They're like the weather system affecting the whole airport, influencing many neurons at once, making them more or less likely to fire. This allows for literally trillions of different activity patterns within the same physical structure.
Trillions. Wow. So the same hardware can run countless different software patterns.
In a manner of speaking, yes. And then there are the slower changes, what we call plasticity.
Ah, the brain changing itself.
Right. Neurons dying off, new ones being born in some specific areas like the hippocampus, connections getting stronger or weaker based on how often they're used together.
The neurons that fire together, wire together idea?
That's Hebb's principle, exactly. This is how learning physically changes our brain's wiring over time.
And you mentioned neurons aren't just single taskers.
That's another key point. What's fascinating here is the flexibility of individual neurons. A single neuron can participate in many different functions, many different mental events.
So calling something the visual cortex is kind of misleading.
It reflects where scientists initially focused their research, or maybe the primary function, but it's not the exclusive job of those neurons. For example, in people who are blindfolded for a while and learn Braille, neurons in their visual cortex actually become more involved in processing touch.
It's like a Swiss Army knife, where each tool can potentially be used for more than one thing, maybe.
That's a good way to think about it.
Mm.
It's not quite distinct tools, but neurons collaborating in different teams for different tasks. And then there's this concept called degeneracy.
Degeneracy sounds negative.
It's not meant that way in neuroscience. It's the fascinating idea that there isn't always one single way, one fixed set of neurons for your brain to achieve a task or create an experience.
Like multiple ways to get the same result.
Exactly. Different groups of neurons can team up to produce the same outcome. Think about reaching for a cup. You might do it slightly differently each time, using slightly different neural pathways. Or even the feeling of fear. Barrett argues it can be constructed by various combinations of neurons, not just one fear circuit.
Okay, that adds another layer of flexibility.
All of this points to the brain's incredible complexity. It's not just about having billions of neurons, it's about the network's ability to configure itself into an enormous number of distinct neural patterns through collaboration and coordination. The behavior of a complex system is more than the sum of its parts.
And this complexity is what gives us our advanced abilities.
That's the idea. Complexity empowers flexibility, abstract thought, language, imagination, the ability to consider broader contexts, past, future.
So it's not just one part doing thinking, it's the whole complex network enabling it.
Precisely. Barrett uses a great illustration. Imagine three brains. A meatloaf brain, where each neuron has only one single function, very inefficient. A pocket knife brain, with distinct tools for different tasks, better, but still limited.
Like the triune brain idea? Sort of.
Kind of. And then the real brain, where neurons have multiple functions and can combine in countless ways. The real brain, with its flexible, multitasking neurons, has exponentially more possible patterns, and thus more flexibility and power than the other two models.
Okay. Understanding the brain as this dynamic, single, complex network, that leads us to another fascinating point. How does this complex wiring actually come to be in the first place? Barrett discusses how little brains wire themselves to their world,
Yeah, this gets really interesting, and it tackles that whole nature versus nurture debate.
which she says is illusory, right?
Pretty much.
Ah,
Because newborn animals in many species, think of a foal standing up minutes after birth, are born with more complete brain wiring than human babies. We come into the world remarkably unfinished.
our brains are only partially wired at birth.
That's right. And the instructions for completing that wiring, for finishing the job, come largely from our environment, both the physical and, crucially, the social world around us.
So our brains are constantly being sculpted by what we experience and maybe what we don't experience too.
Absolutely. It makes our individual realities literally wired differently based on our unique histories. It's not genes or our environment, it's a constant dynamic interplay. The environment actually guides and regulates how our genes are expressed.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think about vision. The brain areas for vision develop normally only if a baby's eyes are exposed to light after birth. No light, the wiring doesn't happen correctly.
Wow.
Or how a baby learns to locate sounds, that depends on the brain tuning itself to the specific way sound waves bounce off the unique shape of their ears.
So the physical environment shapes the wiring.
It does. Even stranger, we pick up external genes, like from bacteria in our gut, that can influence our brain function. But perhaps the most critical environmental factor, especially early on, is caregivers.
Parents, family, the people around the baby, they play a massive role in sculpting that developing brain.
A profoundly crucial role. When you present your face to a newborn, you're literally teaching their brain how to process faces. Exposing them to different shapes and objects helps train their visual system.
And things like talking to them, cuddling.
Absolutely. Cuddling, talking, making eye contact. These seemingly simple interactions have deep and lasting effects on brain development and wiring. This wiring process happens through two key mechanisms: tuning and pruning.
Okay, tuning and pruning, what do those mean?
Tuning is basically strengthening the connections between neurons that are used frequently or are important for managing the body budget. Dendrites might get bushier, connections stronger, maybe myelin insulation gets thicker for faster signal.
Making the important pathways more robust.
Exactly. And pruning is the other side of the coin, the weakening and dying off of connections that are used less often. It sounds harsh, but it's essential.
Use it or lose it in neural form.
Pretty much. Pruning gets rid of inefficient or unnecessary connections, making the whole network more efficient, and actually making room for new learning. You need both tuning and pruning for healthy development.
And caregivers are essential for guiding this.
Absolutely. They are the main regulators of the baby's environment, especially early on. They help the brain tune for healthy body budgeting by providing food at regular times, setting routines for sleep, keeping the baby warm, offering comfort when distressed.
So they're external regulators while the baby's internal regulation systems are still developing.
Precisely. And what caregivers don't do also matters. For example, if a caregiver always immediately rocks a baby to sleep at the first peep, the baby might not get the chance to develop the neural pathways for self-soothing.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. It's about finding the right balance.
It is. And attention develops through this process too. Newborns have very diffuse attention, kind of taking everything in. But through tuning and pruning, guided by what caregivers pay attention to with the baby, smaller neuron communities specialize in picking out relevant details.
Leading to focused attention, like the cocktail party effect, where you can tune into one conversation in a noisy room.
Exactly. Sharing attention with caregivers teaches infants what's important in their environment. This helps construct their niche, the specific slice of the world that's most relevant to their survival and body budget.
And language, that must be a huge example.
A classic one. Babies' brains are tuned and pruned to the specific sound and rhythms of the languages they hear spoken around them in infancy. That's why children typically learn languages much more easily than adults. Their brains are still actively shaping themselves to the linguistic environment.
And does this apply to other things, like recognizing faces?
Yes, the same principle applies. Brains become highly tuned to recognizing the types of faces they see most often in their immediate environment. This can sometimes lead later on to slight difficulties in distinguishing faces of people from different ethnicities they weren't exposed to early on.
It's amazing how our early social world literally shapes the physical structure of our brains. But you mentioned there's a risk involved here. Little brains need social input for typical development.
Yes, absolutely. Just like they need light for vision development, they need attention, language, touch, interaction from other humans.
And without it.
The consequences can be severe. The tragic case of the Romanian orphanages in the 1960s and 70s provides stark, heartbreaking evidence. Children raised with very little social interaction, minimal touching or talking.
What happened to their brains?
They had measurably smaller brains overall, smaller key brain regions, and fewer connections between neurons compared to children raised in families. Some of these effects, thankfully, could be reversed to some extent if children were placed in nurturing foster care early enough, but it highlights just how critical that social input is.
And it's not just extreme cases like orphanages, right? What about less severe neglect?
Right. Persistent neglect, even if less extreme, it'd be inconsistent caregiving.
Right.
Lack of stimulation can have gradual but potentially damaging effects on the wiring related to body budgeting. This might increase vulnerability to health problems later in life, things like heart disease, diabetes, mood disorders.
And poverty, does that play a role?
It certainly can. Poverty often comes with stressors like inadequate nutrition, disrupted sleep patterns, chronic noise, maybe poor temperature regulation. These can alter the development of key brain areas, like the prefrontal cortex, which is crucial for attention, language, and regulating that body budget.
Which could then impact things like school performance.
Exactly. And unfortunately, that can contribute to perpetuating the cycle of poverty across generations. It's a complex issue with biological roots.
But this dependence on the environment for wiring, it also offers a unique evolutionary advantage, doesn't it? Cultural inheritance.
That's the flip side, and it's huge. Because our brains are born partially incomplete, it allows massive amounts of cultural and social knowledge to be transmitted non-genetically across generations.
So evolution kind of offloaded some of the wiring instructions to the world around us, especially the social world.
Exactly. Caregivers curate the baby's niche, passing on language, customs, skills, beliefs. The baby's brain tunes and prunes itself to learn that niche. And then, as that baby grows into an adult, they perpetuate that culture by wiring the brains of the next generation in turn. It's an incredibly efficient way to adapt and pass knowledge.
Mind-blowing stuff. Okay, finally, let's get to the fourth big idea. Your brain predicts almost everything you do. This one really flipped the traditional view of our brains as simply reacting to the world.
It really does. Barrett starts with a powerful anecdote about a soldier in a conflict zone who misidentified a young boy carrying a stick as a guerrilla fighter with a weapon.
Right, a tragic misperception.
And it perfectly illustrates how our brain's predictions, based on context and past experience, can fundamentally shape our perception before we're even fully aware of the details. Our view of the world isn't like a camera taking a direct photograph. It's a fluid, constantly updated construction project by our brain.
So it's not just reacting to input, it's actively guessing what the input means based on what it already knows.
Exactly, based on past experiences, memories, your current internal state, your body budget, and the immediate context, your brain is constantly making educated guesses, predictions about what's happening right now and what's likely to happen next.
Why does it do that? Why not just take in the data as it comes?
Well, think about the sheer volume and ambiguity of raw sensory data hitting us every moment. Light waves, sound waves, chemicals. If our brain only processed that passively, we'd be incredibly slow and probably overwhelmed.
Okay.
Memory allows the brain to use past experiences to impose meaning on ambiguous input quickly and efficiently and predict the best course of action. And this predictive process applies not just to what we see or hear, but also to our internal feelings.
How so?
Your brain anticipates what you will see, hear, and feel next based on similar situations in the past, your current bodily state, and even the actions you're planning to take. You sense with your brain, using sensory organs as inputs, not just with your eyes or ears directly reporting reality.
So, back to the soldier's case. His brain, primed by the context of war and past experiences, predicted threat or guerrilla fighters even with ambiguous visual input from a distance.
Precisely. His internal expectations, his predictions, prevailed over the actual fuzzy sensory data in that split second.
And we all do this, just maybe less dramatically.
All the time. Ever thought you saw a friend in a crowd, then realized it was a stranger? Or felt your phone vibrate in your pocket when it didn't? Or had a song stuck in your head?
Yeah, phantom vibrations happen to me constantly.
Those are all examples of your brain's predictions momentarily overriding or creating sensory experience. Barrett describes our normal day-to-day experience as a carefully controlled hallucination.
Whoa, controlled hallucination. That sounds unsettling.
It sounds dramatic, but it just means our reality is constructed by the brain. It's
Mhm.
constrained by the actual world. And our bodies, of course, is not usually like a psychedelic trip,
Mhm.
but the experience itself is generated internally based on predictions.
So perception isn't passive reception, it's active construction.
Exactly. And this is the normal, efficient way the brain works, giving meaning to sense data, usually completely unconsciously. It happens incredibly fast, before the full sensory data even finishes its journey into the brain.
Before. How?
Your brain is already sending predictive signals down, guessing what's coming based on the initial input and context. These predictions transform the raw sensory input, the light waves, the pressure waves, the chemicals, into the recognizable objects, sounds, smells, tastes we experience. It's how we understand written words instantly instead of just seeing lines and curves.
Like when a sentence ends unexpectedly.
You feel that jolt of unsatisfaction, right? That's your brain's prediction about sentence structure being violated.
Huh. Okay. What about something like classical conditioning, Pavlov's dogs?
Barrett reframes that too. It wasn't just the dogs reacting stimulus response style to the bell. Their brains were predicting the experience of eating upon hearing the bell and preparing their bodies accordingly, salivating, releasing digestive enzymes. The bell became a cue that updated the prediction.
So conditioning is the brain learning new predictive associations.
Yes, you can think of predictions as the brain constantly having a conversation with itself. Neurons are making guesses about the future based on the past and present, announcing these guesses to other brain areas. Meanwhile, incoming sense data from the world and body acts like feedback, confirming or correcting the prediction.
Does it make just one prediction?
No, it likely generates a whole flurry of possibilities simultaneously, each with a certain probability based on past experience. The winning prediction, often the one that best matches the incoming sense data, but not always, as the soldier example shows, is what becomes your action and your conscious experience.
And if the brain predicts well, if the guess matches reality.
Then the incoming sense data primarily serves to confirm the pre-existing neural pattern. What you perceive is, in a sense, already constructed in your head before the data fully arrives. This makes perception incredibly efficient and prepares you to act quickly.
But what happens when the prediction is wrong, when reality doesn't match the guess?
That's prediction error. And prediction error drives learning. The
Oh.
brain incorporates the surprising new sense data, updates its internal model, corrects its prediction, and constructs an updated experience. This helps improve future predictions in similar situations. That's basically how we learn from experience.
This predictive nature even extends to our actions, you said, initiating them before we're consciously aware.
That's what some evidence suggests, yes. Based on your brain's predictions derived from memory and the current environment, actions can be launched before your subjective feeling of deciding to act.
Which brings up huge questions about free will, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It's a deep philosophical debate. But from a neuroscientific perspective, it highlights how much our actions are influenced by the predictions shaped by our past experiences and current context.
So if our actions are driven by predictions based on the past, does that mean we're just running on autopilot? What about creativity or making conscious choices?
That's a great point. While body budgeting and prediction are fundamental, the sheer complexity of the human brain network allows for incredibly sophisticated simulations and considerations. We can run multiple predictive models, weigh potential outcomes, imagine futures that haven't happened.
So we can consciously influence the prediction process.
To some extent, yes. Think of it like this. The initial prediction might be automatic, based on past habits, but the complex brain allows for reflection, for overriding or choosing among predictions, especially when there's time and conflicting information. Our capacity for abstract thought and planning is likely an emergent property of this predictive system.
So while we can't change the past experiences that feed the predictions,
We can influence our future predictions. How? By learning new ideas, consciously curating new experiences, trying new activities. Every new experience provides data to update your brain's predictive models.
Barrett gives the example of reframing test anxiety, right?
Yes. Instead of predicting panic and failure, when you feel your heart race before an exam, you can consciously practice reinterpreting those sensations as energized determination. With practice, you can change the prediction your brain makes in that situation, potentially improving your performance.
And this applies to social interactions too. Empathy.
Absolutely. By actively trying to understand others' perspectives, maybe reading different viewpoints or having conversations with people unlike you expose your brain to new data. This can help change your automatic predictions about people who hold different beliefs or come from different backgrounds.
Which could potentially lead to a less polarized world.
That's the hope. It's not, as Barrett puts it, magical liberal academic rubbish, but grounded in how our predictive brains learn and adapt based on experience. Cultivating empathy literally involves trying to get your brain to predict from another person's perspective.
Can we change predictions in the heat of the moment, though, when emotions are high?
That's much harder because the automatic predictions are already firing, and body budget resources might be heavily allocated. But what you can do is change the underlying predictions beforehand through practice, learning, and reflection. This makes certain automatic behaviors more or less likely in the future.
So understanding our predictive brains seems to come with increased responsibility for our actions.
In a way, yes. Because while predictions are often automatic, they are shaped by our past experiences, the things we've learned, the environments we've chosen as adults. Our past actions and choices become the seeds for future predictions.
But we weren't responsible for our initial wiring as babies, right? That was shaped by caregivers and an early environment.
Exactly. You're not responsible for the niche your caregivers created for you when you were an infant. But as adults, we gain some capacity to change our niche, to seek out new experiences, to challenge our belief, to learn new things.
And our actions today become our brain's predictions for tomorrow.
Precisely. So there's a degree of freedom and responsibility that comes with understanding this process. You can take steps to shape the predictions that will guide your future actions and experiences.
Okay, so to summarize our deep dive into these lessons from Lisa Feldman Barrett, the brain's primary job isn't lofty thinking, but the absolutely crucial task of managing the body budget, predicting and meeting the body's needs.
Right. And it operates as a single, incredibly complex and dynamically interconnected predictive network, not separate warring parts. It's constantly learning and adapting its wiring based on input from the world.
And our experiences of the world, even our own emotions, are not simply direct readouts of reality or internal states. They are active constructions, like controlled hallucinations, based on these ongoing predictions.
Exactly. And for you, the learner, we hope understanding these core concepts offers a profound insight into your own learning process. It highlights how you perceive information, how your brain actively makes sense of the world through predictions.
and also your inherent capacity for change, for learning new things, and maybe for understanding perspectives different from your own. Hopefully, those aha moments have landed as we've debunked some common brain myths and reframed ideas like rationality and free will.
Yeah, seeing the brain as predictive rather than just reactive is a pretty big shift.
Finally, here's something to chew on. How does understanding your brain as a predictive organ shift your perspective on your daily experiences? When you feel an emotion or react to something, can you catch a glimpse of the underlying prediction?
And what does it imply about your responsibility in shaping not only your own future predictions and actions, but also your interactions and understanding of others, especially in a world where so much of our social reality is itself a human construct, built on shared predictions?
It's definitely something worth pondering long after our deep dive concludes.
Absolutely. And if you're keen to explore these ideas further, we highly recommend delving deeper into Lisa Feldman Barrett's work like How Emotions Are Made, or this book, 7.5 Lessons, or exploring related topics in neuroscience and psychology. There's a whole universe of fascinating information waiting to be discovered out there.